Hey, deserving listeners, it's just me today. I have been getting a lot of emails and messages from people asking me to do an episode on Theon Greyjoy. I have done episodes on Joffrey. I've done an episode on Ramsay and Cersei and the Hound. The one on the Hound is for patrons only, so become a patron, you can hear that one. And people have been bugging me for, I don't know, a couple years now, asking me to do Theon because his character is just so darn interesting. I think a lot of people identify with Theon. By the way, this is all from the Game of Thrones or the book series, A Song of Ice and Fire. If you didn't know that, then you are not going to be interested in this podcast episode, is my guess. But anyway, I think a lot of people identify with Theon Greyjoy. He's particularly the TV version, because in the book he comes. It's hard to identify with Theon in the books, but in the TV show they make it easier. You know, he's made mistakes. It's like some sort of Game of Thrones version of Curb Your Enthusiasm or something. You know, you could just imagine Theon with that music in the background, bum bum bum, you know, that Curb Your Enthusiasm soundtrack, and just seeing Theon make all these mistakes, and then later on, he's just trying to be a good guy. He's just an insecure guy with faults, and he's trying. And I think that in a certain way, I think for a lot of us, we can identify with that feeling that we're trying, and then we make mistakes, or we lose our temper, or we make a bad joke, or we put our foot in our mouth, or we're insecure and we lash out, or we're immature and we're trying to act cool, and then we suffer a great deal because of that. And then in the end, we just look back and think, we just smack our head and say, I can't, we face palm, and we just say, I can't believe I did all those things. And I think in the Game of Thrones universe, Theon is a character that really exemplifies that feeling for a lot of us. He has undoubtedly suffered more than any other character in this story. I'm trying to think of another character who's suffered more. I mean, certainly people have died and been tortured and been through a lot of stuff, but Theon has he's like, since the beginning of his story, he's just been suffering. And so I think that makes him a very unique character. Also in the TV show, Alfie Allen, the guy who plays Theon, he's the perfect actor because he's awesome at playing both a super arrogant person who is insecure deep down, and he's also awesome at playing a super pathetic person when he's weak and when he's depressed and sad. So the full range of Alfie Allen's acting really comes through, and I think makes Theon a much more sympathetic character. Again, particularly because of the way they write for the character in the TV show. And I'll get more into the differences between the book and the TV show in a bit. But first, let's introduce the podcast. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist, and I'm also a professor. Before moving forward, I just want to say, become a patron of the podcast. When you become a patron at patreon.com, go to patreon.com. When you become a patron, you get access to hundreds of premium episodes in which we do deep dives on various different topics. All right, so before moving forward, I just want to say that I'm recording this in mid-2017, which is just before season 7 of the TV show and before book 6 has been published. So keep that in mind. So I don't know anything. If you're listening to this in 2030 or something, there's going to be stuff that I don't know about yet because I'm in the good old days in 2017 when Donald Trump was president and all that kind of stuff. Also, I'm going to spoil the entire story up until season 6 and season 7 and book 6. So keep that in mind too. But I'm guessing if you're listening to this, you're all caught up. Just a little bit about the actor, Alfie Allen, born in London, 1986, which would make him about 30 years right now. I didn't realize this until looking this up just now, but he's the older sister of singer Lily Allen, which is interesting. And he's the third cousin of singer Sam Smith, which is also interesting. Okay, so Theon Greyjoy. He's one of the narrators of the books. If you haven't read the books, each book is narrated by a different character. So it'll say something like, the title of the chapter will be Arya, and then that whole chapter will be told from Arya's point of view. Well, Theon is one of those people. So there'll be chapters that'll just have Theon, and then we go into Theon's point of view. And so a lot of characters we only hear about through these other people's point of view. Like, pretty sure Ramsay never has his own chapters. And so we hear a lot about Ramsay through Theon. So I believe that Theon is the primary person of the narrator of 13 chapters. I don't know if narrator is the right term because it's sort of like a third person. I'm not a literary person, but I hope you get my point. Anyway, 13 chapters of all the books involve Theon as the quote-unquote narrator. He has a number of different aliases that I just want to get out front here. Prince of Fools, Theon Turncloak. That's the main alias nickname that he earned after betraying the Starks. The Squid Prince, because their coat of arms, their symbol is a squid, and so since he's the prince of Pike, he's the Squid Prince. He was also known as Reek for a while. He was more formally known as the rightful lord of the Iron Islands. He was also nicknamed Theon Kinslayer because he killed his kin, the Starks being sort of his kin. And the Prince of Stink. The Prince of Stink. Okay. Other titles, official titles that he's had are Captain of the Sea Bitch. There's a boat called Sea Bitch, and he was captain of it. He was Lord of Winterfell for a time, and Prince of Winterfell. Okay, history. So let's start from the beginning. This is all before the books begin. It's not sure when he was born. They don't tell the exact year. They just give 10 years ago, blah, blah. So he was either born in 278 AC or 279. And he was born at Pike. Theon was apparently named potentially after Theon Stark, who was an old king in the north back in the day. And I believe Theon is not a common name in the Game of Thrones universe, and so it's possible that he was actually named after one of the early kings in the north, Theon Stark, which is an interesting twist right from the beginning, if you think about if George Martin was thinking that far in advance, which he probably was because he always thinks that far in advance. So going back into the early childhood for Theon, whenever I do these deep dives into these characters for Game of Thrones, I always want to know about their early childhood because early childhood development plays a large part in one's adult personality. So what do we know about Theon's childhood? Well, the fact is we actually don't know much about his early childhood. When I did episodes on Joffrey and Cersei and Ramsay and even the Hound, there's more data in the books regarding their early childhoods, which helps us to understand how their personalities developed. For Theon, we just don't know much about his early childhood, but we can assume that his parents were not ideal. As an adult, Balon Greyjoy, his father, the Lord of Pike, was an asshole, right? We just know of him. He's not a nice guy. I mean, at the very least, he's not warm, right? But what about Theon's mother? Well, we don't know much about his mother, Alanis. Alanis, like Alanis Morissette. Later in life, Alanis would become mentally ill and very sickly. I can't remember the exact quotes, but she's locked in or she isolates herself in a tower or something and is ranting and raving, because her two sons are killed during Greyjoy's rebellion, which is later. But later in life, Alanis, during the time of the books, she's referred to as basically mentally ill because her sons were killed and this sort of thing. So if we're to imagine that this was a real situation, clinically speaking, we could imagine that Alanis probably had precursors to either severe depression or schizophrenia, some sort of psychotic disorder, early in life, which would have affected the way she parented all of her children, including Theon. So, but again, we don't know. But given Theon's personality, particularly in the books, we could surmise that his early childhood was not ideal. It's even possible that he, like many of the aristocratic youth, he was probably raised by wet nurses and slaves and this sort of thing, or servants, I should say. And this doesn't always lend itself to proper attachment development as a young child, because if your servants are not always permanent, these attachment figures can kind of come and go from your life. And so Theon has evidence in his adult life, and there's, clues that his early childhood attachment was not great. We do know, however, that Theon was routinely beat by his older brothers, Roderick and Meryn. And so this is the beginning of so this bit of data we can really dig down on for a second here. So he's the youngest son. There's three sons. He has a sister, Asha, as well. In the show, they call her Yara. But he's the youngest of three boys. The Ironborn, or the Greyjoys, people from the Iron Islands, they're very tough, and they value toughness and they hate weakness. And they, think of them like, if you're into Star Trek, they're like Klingons. They, in some ways, it's just like they're always fighting. And if you can't keep up, then, them's the breaks. You're just going to be squished. And so he, being the smaller of the three brothers, was frequently being squished. And also, we can imagine that it's not a routine thing, at least, for families to just allow beatings of younger boys. It's just, I imagine that's just not exactly like always typical to the Ironborn. So we can imagine that Roderick and Meryn were beating their younger brother Theon, partially because they might have been competing for their father's approval or attention from the mother or something. A lot of times in families, when you have children who are beating up on each other, it's the result of various different mistreatment or neglect that the older kids are going through. If you are properly loved, properly attached, well enough attached, and given enough attention, then you don't have the urge to beat your younger siblings. Or I should say, you probably have the urge, because I think everyone has the urge to beat their younger siblings, but you also have enough empathy and compassion and love so that you will show restraint when you do have that urge. Apparently, Theon's older brothers did not have that restraint and routinely beat him. So you can imagine little Theon, age 5, just being tormented by his older brothers, and how terrible that would have felt. And then we can imagine his mother having the precursors of major depression or psychosis. And then we can imagine Balon Greyjoy, Theon's father, just, saying, well, Theon, you got to suck it up, and just how emasculating and how humiliating, how terrifying that must have been for Theon, and how he would be left on his own to develop his own defense mechanisms, which I'll get into in a second. Okay, so skipping forward to when Theon is 10 years old. This is when Greyjoy's rebellion happens. Basically, in Greyjoy's rebellion, Balon Greyjoy, Theon's father, he tries to secede from the Iron Throne. So the Iron Throne is in King's Landing, right? So at the time, Robert Baratheon was king, right? And Eddard Stark was Warden of the North. So when Theon was 10, this is about 9 years before the beginning of the books, Balon Greyjoy just randomly decides he wants to secede from the Seven Kingdoms and wants independence. And so Balon, says, "I'm king now, and we're no longer part of the Seven Kingdoms." And he wanted independence. And part of this is because they used to actually be free. The reason why they call them the Seven Kingdoms is because they were actually in the past 7 different kingdoms. And the Iron Islands used to be free and independent until 300 years ago when Aegon, the first Aegon Targaryen, 300 years ago, he conquered most of Westeros except for Dorne, by the way. And Aegon, with his 2 sisters who were riding on large dragons, by the way, Aegon the first, Aegon Targaryen, he, went around Westeros to subdue all the other kingdoms, including the Iron Islands. Incidentally, during Aegon's conquest, 300 years before the books start, Harrenhal, if you remember Harrenhal from when Arya is there with Valar Morghulis and all that kind of stuff, the reason why it was in ruins is because the dragons breathed fire from above that burned Harrenhal to the ground. And the swords of the dead from Harrenhal were melted into the Iron Throne. So everything's kind of connected in that way in this book, which I think is pretty cool. But anyway, the Greyjoys were, or the early king of the Iron Islands was crushed by Aegon during this time, as was the king in the north and other kings of the various different kingdoms. And Balon and the Greyjoys and the Ironborn never really forgot that. So it was 300 years basically with them feeling as though they're being subdued. Think of it like you're the Confederacy of the United States. There's definite feelings, and it's only been 150 years or something since the Civil War. And the Confederate, there are still people that, like to have the Confederate flag. I was just in Seattle, in Ballard of all places, actually. And I was down by the various boats that are in, what do you call it? I'm from Seattle, I should know, but there's boats all docked. What do you call it? We're in a bunch of boats. Anyway, a mooring area. Well, people have various flags flying from their masts, and one of the flags was a Confederate flag. And I'm just thinking, really? And I had a couple beers, and I had aspirations of breaking into the boat area and tearing down that flag. But when you look around at all the different flags on the masts, most of them were Seattle. Like there's a few gay flags, the rainbow flag, and there's other kinds of flags. So I don't know. I guess if you want to fly a Confederate flag like an asshole, then great. But so, that's 150 years ago, and people are still upset about that. And there have been times when people in the South have said that they would like to finish the job and really defeat the North and all this kind of stuff. And so similar to that, the Ironborn on the Iron Islands are like, it's been 300 years. We want to be free. And so they try to break free. And this is when Theon was 10 years old. And Balon Greyjoy's like, we're gonna break free. And me and my 2 sons, Roderick and Meryn, are going to, defeat our enemies and we're going to establish independence. And it kind of makes sense because there are these islands, one, which are easy to defend, right? And the Ironborn are the are the navy of Westeros. They're the ones who have the ships and are the fastest at making ships and the best sailers and the best battle people at sea. And so it makes sense that if they wanted their independence, that it wouldn't be that hard for them, right? Because they could defeat all the other navies and just sort of sit on their iron islands and be cool. But King Robert was not going to have that shit. And so King Robert and Eddard Stark went to put down Greyjoy's rebellion, and incidentally, Lord Jorah Mormont, Jorah, was also there with Robert and Eddard. This is back when Jorah was still in good graces with King Robert. This is before Jorah fled Westeros to escape execution for slave trading, which eventually led him to Daenerys. But anyway, so Jorah, Robert, Eddard put down Greyjoy's rebellion, and they kill, I don't know if they personally killed, but their force killed Theon's older brothers. And this made Theon the heir to House Greyjoy and the heir to Lord of the Iron Islands, which was interesting. Suddenly, Theon is like, whoa, I'm now heir to the House of Greyjoy. Well, so Eddard and Robert put down Balon's rebellion, and instead of killing Balon, they leave Balon in power, and they say, if you ever do this again, we will kill you, and we're going to take your only heir, Theon Greyjoy. We're going to take him, and Eddard is going to keep him as a ward, which is basically kind of like a hostage. And Balon, if you get out of line, you know what's going to happen to your only son. And so this was a common tactic back in the day, right? And it makes sense, right? Because if you kill Balon, maybe some other Ironborn will rise up and out of resentment and attack the North again. So it's like, show mercy to Balon, which Balon is happy to receive, and at the same time take one of Balon's sons and or his only son, and treat him well, right? So you're treating Theon well by raising him and teaching him and not torturing him. So Balon's happy about that. And, just always know if you get out of line, then your son is dead. So, it's a good tactic to kind of keep the peace, I guess. It's similar to marrying between two different warring houses, right? So Theon is, he's a child in House Greyjoy, being raised probably poorly and being beat by his two older brothers. And then there's this massive war, and he is taken hostage at the age of 9 or 10 by Eddard Stark. And he's raised in Winterfell for 9 years. So imagine this. You're a young boy. Your father decides to go to war. And in the end, your home is invaded by the enemy. Not just like it's like the enemy is coming. Just think about how terrifying that would have been. And your older brothers fly into battle and are killed by the enemy, Eddard Stark. Your father is humiliated by bending the knee. Your mother starts to go crazy because of all this stress and the older brothers being killed. And then you're basically kidnapped by the enemy and forced to live with these people who hate you and despise you. You're isolated, you're afraid, you might be desperate for security, and you feel powerless. You're this young boy and you're just ripped away from your father, and it's just think about the psychological toll that would have on a 10-year-old. Especially to a 10-year-old, right? Because if you're older, you might be able to handle the stress. But at 10, 10-year-olds need their parents. 10-year-olds are really desperate for the security from their parents. Well, whenever I hear about families contemplating sending their 10-year-olds or even 12-year-olds to boarding school. I just think you do not understand how people develop. And that is going to do, unless you're a bad parent, which by all means send them away. But if you're, remotely good as a parent, a 10-year-old boy, a 12-year-old boy, they need their parents. They need their parents' love. They need their parents' attention. They need their parents' security. And even though 10-year-old boys can act like they're super independent, they're not. It's just not natural. And people will say stuff like, well, back in the old days, 10-year-olds were treated like adults. Yes, 10-year-olds often were treated like adults, meaning that they were given responsibilities, but they weren't sent away. That's the difference here, is that before industrialization, and really even before there was enough wealth for boarding schools, I suppose, children, even though they were put to work, most people were farmers. So if you were 5, you were put to work on the farm, but you didn't leave the farm. You stayed on the farm. Maybe when you're 15 and, especially if you're a girl and you're married off, then you might move to the farm next door or the farm across town or something. But you're not just going to be completely abandoned to some other, situation. So it's unnatural to send kids away. And Theon was sent away, and he's to the enemy. He's a prisoner, a hostage of the enemy, ripped away from everything that he knows and ripped away from the little bit of security that he had found. So Theon was raised with the Stark children, and there's so many of them, right? And he's tutored by Maester Luwin, and he's also tutored by, I think he's called the Master of Arms, not sure, but the head fighter guy, Sir Roderick Cassell. And he thought of Robb as a close friend. Robb Stark, who later became King of the North, was younger. So Jon Snow was the oldest of the Stark children, even though he's not a Stark kid, he's a child. But I believe Theon was oldest, and then he had Jon Snow, and then he had Robb, and then you had Sansa, and it was Bran next, and then Arya, and then Rickard, something like that. Anyway, so Robb was younger, and Theon considered Robb to be a close friend, and considered him to be, eventually considered him to be like a brother. Theon also started to see Eddard Stark as a father. Eddard was a good father. He was distant, but he was a consistent father. Eddard, they talk about this in the book, Eddard only spanked Theon once after Theon was playing as a 12-year-old kid or something, and bumped into old Nan and knocked her to the floor. And Eddard took Theon aside and spanked him. And Theon actually thinks back at this time as actually fondly. Not that he liked being spanked, but he was just like, compared to the shit I went through on a daily basis at Pike, it was just like, oh, this is like normal parenting. So he appreciated Eddard as a father in some ways. Theon fantasized that Eddard would marry him to Sansa and claim him as a son. Young Theon, 11, 12, 13, is like, oh, maybe Eddard will find me worthy to marry his oldest daughter. And then I will be able to call Eddard truly as a father. But in his older years, but looking back, Theon would chastise himself or sort of laugh at himself and think how naive and stupid he was to think that Eddard would ever marry him to Sansa, So Theon really looked up to Eddard. He, in his teenage years, really began to bond with the Starks. And just think about how different those households would have been, right? At Pike, you have Balon, and what a guy he is, and then you have Alanis, his mother, who we don't know, but probably had issues. And then you have his older brothers who are beating him all the time. And then instantly, this war happens, you're invaded, and you get taken away, kidnapped, and you're terrified, and you're like, oh, this isn't so bad. Winterfell, it's kind of a nice place to live. These people are pretty cool. So, but Theon, had really complicated feelings, right? Because he occasionally reminded himself that Eddard was the one who invaded Pike. So this is all internally for Theon in the books. And I don't know if it was explicit. I can't remember if it was explicitly discussed, but Theon would occasionally remember, wait a second, Eddard was the guy who invaded my land and killed my brothers and humiliated my father. So should I really look up to this guy? So Theon was in a very difficult, strange position regarding his loyalties and regarding his attachment figures. He was attached early in life to his own family, but his family was terrible to him. I mean, at least we have evidence his brothers were terrible, but in all likelihood, his whole family was terrible to him. And so he loves them, but they're terrible to him. And then he comes to live with the Starks, and he loves the Starks, but they are his, they're imprisoning him, and they killed, half of his family. So everyone he's attached to has a very, a very damaging role in his life. There's not a single person. We don't know about Alanis. Maybe Alanis was great, but there's not a single person that we know of that Theon was attached to in his life that didn't play a major role in damaging his life. So just think about that. Also, not only his attachment and his loyalties, not only are his attachment and loyalties getting all confused, but his morality is also being pulled in two completely opposite directions. The Ironborn in Pike, they take pride in attacking and stealing from others. This is what they call paying the iron price, right? They're like Vikings. They will, they like to raid innocent towns, take what they want, and that's what they consider to be, best in life. What is Conan? What is best in life? And to the Ironborn, they would say, to to sail in your boat, to come upon a hapless village, to kill all the men, take everything and they have, and to take the women and the daughters as salt wives. They called them salt wives, which is, I'm not exactly sure what a salt wife is, but I'm pretty sure it's like a slave wife in some ways. Anyway, so that's the Ironborn and their morality. But Ned Stark has this completely opposite morality, right? He has this classic sense of honor. Of anyone in the book, Eddard Stark was the most truthful, the most honorable. He was the most faithful to his family. Spoiler alert, right? Because I'm going to spoil the entire thing up until 2017. But the one thing that Eddard did that was dishonorable was to have sex with a random person and have Jon Snow as a bastard son. But then we learn that Jon Snow is not Eddard Stark's bastard son, that Jon Snow is someone else's son. So the one thing that Eddard did that he was ashamed of, he never actually did. So Ned is this super honorable guy, super truthful. When Eddard figures out that Joffrey, Tommen, and man, what's the girl's name? Oh boy. Anyway, the three kids from the three Cersei kids, they are not actually Robert's kids. When Eddard figures this out, instead of running straight to the king or rounding up Cersei and rounding up the kids, he goes to Cersei and tells her, "Look, I'm about to tell the king the truth. I'm about to tell the king that your kids are actually not his kids, and that they're actually Jaime's kids. And so I'm going to give you a chance to get your kids together and get out of town, because, once Robert finds out, he's going to kill you, and he's probably going to kill your kids, and I can't have that on my conscience. And so I'm telling you this to save your life. And this is what got Eddard locked up. If he had just gone straight to Robert, like a normal person, but because Eddard is so honorable and so good and so caring about human life, he shot himself in the foot. Well, imagine how different of a morality Theon is experiencing now. We have the Ironborn who take from the weak, and we have Eddard who tries to protect the weak. For his people, it's immoral to not steal from other people. If you don't invade an innocent village and take things from them, then there's something wrong with you. These weak people deserve to have things taken from them. But for Ned Stark, it's the opposite. For him, it's immoral to take from the weak because they are weak. In fact, it's your job to protect the weak. You might even put your life on the line to protect the weak. It's just a completely different morality. And this would have a very disorienting effect on Theon as Theon was developing his own morality, which we can see in the story that Theon has a very weird sense of morality. Okay, so that brings us up to the beginning. And the last little bit here is they talk about Theon as having a lot of sexual partners. He has sex with a lot of women, sex workers, but also just random women. So that's all right. So that brings us to the beginning of the books. And so let's go into that. But before that, let's take a little break. Okay, we're back from the break. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast, do so by going to patreon.com. That's patreon.com. Become a patron of the podcast and get access to hundreds of premium episodes in which we do various different deep dives. Also know that a portion of your pledge goes towards various charities that we support. If we reach our next goal, we will start donating to petfinder.com, which saves animals from being euthanized and connects them with homes that want them. My cats are from petfinder.com, and I just love petfinder.com. I love petfinder. All right, so become a patron, do that, and if we get up to a certain goal, we'll start donating to Petfinder. All right, so the beginning of the books. First book, A Game of Thrones. Theon is described with various different adjectives, including lean. So he's lean. The guy who plays Alfie Allen is also lean, right? He's described as dark, which is interesting because Alfie Allen is not dark. It's hard to know what George Martin means by dark, but he's described as dark. He's described as handsome. I would say that Alfie Allen is handsome. He's described as being vain and arrogant. So that's interesting, right? Very vain and arrogant. So annoying in that way. And he has a distinctive quality to him in which he always seems to find everything amusing. He's always smiling at things. In the TV show, they don't really portray it the way that I pictured it in my head as I was reading the books. In the books, he's always smiling. He's just, or frequently he's smiling. He's just like, like he's above everything. He's just like, oh boy, here we go again. Oh, you little people and your stupid things. He's always kind of smirking at everything. I think it's described as a cocky smile. Catelyn, for instance, Catelyn Stark, she says, quote, this is in the book, she studied Theon Greyjoy's sly smile, wondering what it meant. That young man had a way of looking as though he knew some secrets. That young man had a way of looking as though he knew some secret jest that only he was privy to. Catelyn had never liked it. Unquote. So Catelyn never liked Theon in the way that she never liked Jon Snow for obvious reasons. And Catelyn's looking at this smiling kid, and he always looks like he has something up his sleeve, like an Eddie Haskell or something. And she didn't like it. So that's how he's described, but he's also described as being insecure, which makes sense, right? You know, he, as we've been talking about, he has massive attachment injuries. His mother was seemingly a little off. His father, Balon, is definitely not a warm guy. He's probably not raised so well. His brothers beat him as a child. Then his brothers are murdered. He's ripped away from his family. And this often results in insecurity, meaning that he has been given the message that he is not worthy. He's not worthy of love. He's not worthy of attention. He's not worthy of respect. So a common defense against this notion, because when you have that notion running around in your head, that psychodynamic of, I am not worthy of love, I'm not worthy of security, I'm not worthy of respect, no one likes me, no one is thinking of my well-being, then you need a defense against that, because if you let that really, rattle around in your head, then it's terrifying. So you need some mental psychodynamic trick in the form of a defense mechanism in order to protect yourself from constantly having to worry that no one is there to help you. Well, a common defense against this notion is to create a persona that, this fake person, this fake identity that doesn't really care about love or attention. It's an arrogant persona. It's like, well, I don't care. I don't care about you. A lot of teenagers are this way. Why? Because they're massively insecure human beings. And this protects Theon from further ridicule because he believes that no one will know how scared he is on the inside and how ashamed he is on the inside. And it also protects him from acknowledging to himself how vulnerable he is, because he can believe in this fantasy that he's super cool and he doesn't care. But deep down, he cares more than any other person around him. So that's where the arrogance comes from. He's massively insecure deep down because everyone has treated him in a way that would make him feel very insecure. But he puffs himself up in this very arrogant way as a way of protecting himself from further ridicule and from acknowledging to himself that he is in fact extremely vulnerable to being hurt by other people. We can imagine that this was developed early in life when his brothers were beating him, which again, you have a number of different defenses available to you, one of which is to act like you don't care. So your brothers are beating you or making fun of you or something, and even though it cuts deep, you realize that your older brothers are just going to make it worse if you let on that it cuts deep. And so instead you just act like, I don't care, I don't care what you say, you can act whatever, you can say whatever you want to. I'm Theon Greyjoy, blah, blah, blah. But deep down, he's extremely hurt. So this is Theon's go-to defense because he's walking around in a constant state of fear and anxiety and insecurity. And so he also walks around with a persona of arrogance. He's also described as wearing a fur-lined cloak with black silk gloves. This is something you really miss out by watching the TV show because George Martin likes to describe how people dress typically. Like when you read about how Ramsay dressed, you just get these like really descriptive things that the TV show just doesn't show really very much. But anyway, so Theon is known to wear a fur-lined cloak, being in the cold north, black silk gloves. So black silk, imagine that, silk gloves. That's interesting, right? It's not leather gloves. It's silk, black silk, like satin gloves. He wears black leather boots. He has a silvery gray lambswool pants. He wears a leather belt, a white leather belt. That's interesting, kind of 80s white leather. And a black velvet doublet embroidered with the Kraken of House Greyjoy. So the Kraken is, it's a big squid-like thing. He is extremely good with a bow. So Sir Roderick Cassell at Winterfell has taught him how to use a bow really well. And so he's a crack shot with a bow. And he's also very good on a horse because that's what the gentry learn. They learn the arts of war. He is in that first scene in the books. Well, the very first scene is beyond the wall, but the next scene is with Eddard, Robb, and Bran. I think Cassell is there, and Theon is there with them when they find the dire wolves and when they execute Jared for deserting the Night's Watch. Also, early on in that first book, and it might happen right away, I'm not sure, but a group of wildlings and a group of Night's Watch deserters are kind of roaming around on, the Winterfell side of the wall, and they come upon the Starks, and they're going to attack Bran in the woods, and Theon comes to the rescue. So let's kind of break this down, because I think it kind of illuminates a family dynamic that will help us understand Theon. So again, as I was saying earlier, Theon is the oldest. He is older than Robb. He's older than Bran. He's older than Jon Snow. I believe he's older than Jon Snow. Yeah, right? Yeah, maybe. Maybe he's not. Anyway, he's older than Robb. But he is, a crack shot with the bow, and some wildlings and Night's Watch deserters are attacking, and he sees Bran in danger. Little Bran. Bran was probably, I don't know, he's probably like 8 or 9 or something at this point. And Theon is thinking, here's my chance. Here's my chance to do something good and valiant, and maybe I'll finally get the acceptance that I've been craving so much my entire life. I can save Bran's life, and maybe I'll be really accepted into this family. And so he rushes in and he shoots the attacker and saves Bran. And he, immediately he's probably just thinking, yes, I nailed it. I've saved Bran's life. Surely Eddard will marry me to Sansa now, and I'll be loved and secure, and everything will be great. But instead of being praised, Robb chastises him. Again, Robb's a younger boy. Robb chastises him in front of everybody, because Robb thinks that he put Bran in danger by shooting an arrow so close to Robb, or to Bran. And Robb is like, you could have hit Bran with that arrow. That was too close. But Theon is like, I'm a crack shot with a bow, man. I'm not going to hit something I'm not aiming at. And wait a second, I just saved Bran's life. How about a little thanks? But instead, Robb chastises him in front of everyone, just yells at him. So this might be a glimpse into Theon's teen years while he was, a hostage at Winterfell, always being treated like a secondary citizen by the Starks. Even they talk about even the bastard Jon Snow was treated better than Theon, and Jon Snow was not treated well, particularly by Catelyn. But Jon Snow was not treated great, and Theon was treated worse than Jon Snow, which is why Theon particularly hated Jon Snow, is because he's like, I'm a prince, I'm a lord's son, not a prince technically, but I'm actual not nobility, and Jon Snow is a bastard son. Why am I being treated worse than a bastard son? So Theon is, he's just never treated like he's really a part of the family. And this furthers his insecurity and his defensive arrogance and his need to have sex with women to prove his manhood, all that kind of stuff. So moving forward in the story, when Eddard is executed by Joffrey and Robb is now Lord of Winterfell and decides to call the bannermen and march south to war, Theon becomes Robb's trusted companion in battle. Robb doesn't really have anyone else in his family now. There's no other men that are related to him that he can really trust. I mean, the next son is Bran, and Bran's too young, and Rickon is, woefully too young. Jon Snow, he can kind of trust, but by now Jon Snow has gone to the Wall, I believe. And so Robb really looks to Theon as a trusted brother in arms. And during the battle in which Jaime gets captured, remember when Jaime Lannister gets captured? Theon boasts to everyone that he almost fought Jaime in battle. Whether or not he would have actually fought well with Jaime is probably, we'll never know. I'm guessing he would have been instantly killed by Jaime in hand-to-hand sword combat. But Theon actually, he rode into battle and almost went toe-to-toe with Jaime. So, Theon was a legit fighter at this point, and he was a legit trusted companion for Robb. And Theon is always the warmonger advisor. He's always telling Robb to be more ruthless. Theon is like, look, if you're going to rule, you're going to have to do some nasty things. Theon's like, okay, now that we've captured Jaime, I think you should just execute him, because Joffrey they killed your father. And so this will begin the revenge, and it'll tell your enemies that you're serious. So let's kill Jaime. They, of course, don't do that. And then Catelyn lets Jaime go on the trade that Jaime will bring the daughters back to her, which never happens, because of Brienne. But anyway, I think I messed up that entire sentence, but I hope you know what I mean. Anyway, so Theon also tells Robb that he should assault the twins, the Freys, and just take it over by force. Robb says, he's always telling Theon, I think I need to rule the way Eddard ruled, which was honorable, not ruthless. Robb eventually becomes king of the North, and Robb is thinking, okay, well, what if we had a navy on our side? What if the Iron Islands were on our side? So Robb sends Theon, and Robb is saying, hey, Theon's my bud, and he's the son, the heir to the throne in the Iron Islands. I'm going to send my bud Theon back home to the Iron Islands to forge an alliance between the Greyjoys and the Starks. And then we'll have this awesome two-pronged attack in terms of the Northmen and their armies and the cavalry, and then we have by sea with this huge navy. This is going to be awesome. So Robb's like, Theon, go home and forge an alliance between us and the Greyjoys. And Theon's like, absolutely. I'm going to do that for Robb. This is going to be awesome. This is going to be glorious. 2 houses is one. And I get to go home. I get to go home where I'm not some sort of reject prisoner of a family. I get to go home and become, the heir to the throne. And surely when I return home, everyone's going to receive me as finally the son is back. And Theon goes home, and no one treats him well. He's just like, how come no one's respecting me? No one respects him, because the Iron Islands have a completely different version of how you earn respect. You don't get it by. They have a much less of a hierarchy in terms of who earns respect, right? You earn respect through your actions, not through your titles. So Theon goes home and he asks his father, Balon, to join Robb in attacking the Lannisters. And Theon asks his father, he says, hey, Balon, let me lead the Iron Fleet against the Lannisters. And when we take Casterly Rock from House Lannister, I would like to be Lord of Casterly Rock, and I will, da-da-da-da. Imagine that, right? The story would have been so much different if Balon would have gone along with this, which would have been a pretty good plan. I mean, because at this point, this is before the Red Wedding and all that kind of stuff. At this point, Robb Stark is looking pretty good. Well, the Lannisters are looking pretty good too. But the Lannisters, they got Stannis coming from the south and, Robb from the north. And imagine if the Greyjoys had, and the Navy had joined up with the Starks. It just would have been, pretty great. But of course, that's not what Balon decided to do, because Balon is a fucking asshole and, of course, didn't listen to his son. But that's what happens, when you hold on to a 300-year-old grudge, right? Like the Confederate flag people in the South. If I lived in the South, I'm guessing I would have a different kind of view on that or something. If I had ancestors who fought on the Confederate side of the war in the Civil War in the United States. So, me living in Seattle, I just have no sympathy for that kind of way of thinking, particularly when the Confederacy was, at least in part, trying to uphold slavery of human beings. I mean, I don't understand how any human can hold on to that as a point of pride. My ancestors fought to systematically enslave a race, an ethnicity of people, I can't imagine how that could be something you would hold on to. It just shows you how motivated reasoning, it can be so strong, because, people in the South have just as much empathy for human beings as anybody else. So how could they think that way? Right. Well, because you really want to, you have this internal need to have pride, because your narrative is such that if the South is cool, then I'm cool. And if the South is a bad place, with a bad history, then I'm a bad person. But, it doesn't have to be that way. All of us, all Americans are guilty of our American history. I mean, we're all guilty of the slavery issue, not just the South. The entire United States is, so we can all share in that shame. The Confederacy was just the last group that was really holding on to that particular form of racism. And again, it's not even, racism is still alive and strong, across the United States. Why in the world am I talking about this right now? I'm talking about it because Balon Greyjoy was holding on to this 300-year-old grudge. And that's why he did not join up with Robb Stark. And that is why, and if only Balon had listened to Theon and joined up with Robb Stark, this whole story would have played out differently and everyone would have won. But of course, the books would not have been as interesting, right? All right, let's take a break before I go on another random jag. And when I get back, we'll continue with the story and the analysis of Theon Greyjoy. Okay, we're back from the break. Again, if you haven't become a patron of the podcast, do so by going to patreon.com. That's patreon.com. Become a patron of the podcast. That is the single best thing you can do to make us feel like we're loved here at Psychology in Seattle. Okay, so we left off with Balon and Theon having a conversation. Theon is like, come on, join Robb and we can rule the world. And Balon is looking Theon up and down. He hasn't seen Theon in 9 years. And Balon says to Theon, Balon, this is from the books. He says, my daughter has taken an axe for a lover. I will not have my son bedeck himself like a whore. It is as I feared. The green lands have made you soft, and the Starks have made you theirs. And Theon says, you're wrong. Ned Stark was my jailer, but my blood is still salt and iron. So this is a great little exchange here. This is the genius of George Martin, because they're talking in a cultural code, but you understand it, right? He says, the green lands have made you soft. So just that little line there, it's a less good author would write something like, the Starks have made you soft. But instead, he says, the green lands have made you soft. Because it gives you so much context in that. Because the Iron Islands, I don't think there's anything green on these islands. And that's how they see, because Winterfell, you wouldn't call it the green lands because it's mostly tundra, right? It's cold lands. But to them, it's the green lands. And he's just like, the Iron Islands are where tough, you become tough by living on the Iron Islands, and the green lands have made you soft, and the Starks have made you theirs. And Theon says, no, Ned Stark was my jailer, but my blood is still salt and iron. So Theon's giving it his best shot, but Balon is not having it because he's looking at Theon and going, you're a soft boy, and just as I worried, the Starks have made you into a Stark, and you're no longer a Greyjoy. Balon rejects Robb's offer of allegiance. Balon tells Theon that he's actually going to invade the north. So Balon's like, Theon, my son, not only am I not going to join Robb, but I'm actually going to attack him while he is weak in the north. While Robb and his bannermen are off fighting in this, further south, I'm going to attack the north because I'm still pissed off about this, 300-year-old grudge. And Theon is now in this weird position. He's like, so I was basically Robb's brother in arms. I come here to, join our families together. And now not only is my father not joining, but he's going to attack Robb. So, but surely I wouldn't go back to Robb because I'm a Greyjoy. I'm heir to the throne in the Iron Islands, and so now I have to join a force that is going to start attacking the lands that I used to live. It's this crazy position, and Theon is given a minor position in the military. He's not even given a ruling position. He's captain of the Sea Bitch. That's that one tiny little boat, the Sea Bitch. Theon meets his sister, Asha. In the TV show, her name is Yara because there is a previous character, Osha, the wildling Osha. And so they didn't want to confuse Asha with Osha. So they changed Asha's name to Yara. But Theon doesn't recognize Asha because, they're both a lot older now. But Asha knows that Theon is Theon because he introduces himself as Theon, but Asha doesn't introduce herself fully at first. And they start to flirt with each other, just like they did in the TV show. And Asha later reveals herself as his sister. And she, says, she basically indicates that he was only flirting with him to make fun of him. Asha says, this is a conversation between Asha and Theon at this time. Asha says, 10 years a wolf, and you land here and think to prince about the islands. Again, this cultural way of talking, I just love it. You land here and think to prince about the islands, but you know nothing and no one. Why should men fight and die for you? Theon says, I am their lawful prince. Asha replies, but the laws of the Greenlands you might be. Oh, sorry. By the laws of the Greenlands you might be, but we make our own laws here, or have you forgotten? So here we see that Theon doesn't really understand his homeland, because in the Greenlands, in Winterfell, if you're the lawful prince, then people have to respect you. But in the Iron Islands, that doesn't mean anything. You have to earn people's respect. And they make their own laws. They're extremely independently minded, which makes it much harder for them to deal with the fact that they have to bend the knee to the king and King's Landing. Also, just dipping into the TV show here a little bit, because the TV show sort of dramatizes the confrontation between Theon and his father. He says, "You act as if," so this is Theon yelling at his father. So Theon's yelling at Balon. "You act as if I volunteered to go. You gave me away, if you remember. The day you bent the knee to Robert Baratheon, after he crushed you. Did you take what was yours then?" So, Balon is like, we take what we want, we don't, blah, blah, blah. And Theon's like, so just to remind you, when Robert Baratheon crushed you, did you take what you want then? No. In fact, he took your son from you. And Balon slaps Theon in the TV show at this point. And Theon continues, "You gave me away, your boy, your last boy. You gave me away like I was some dog you didn't want anymore. And now you curse me because I've come home." So we see here Theon's inner struggle coming out in terms of feeling rejected by his father, which I guess I hadn't thought about till just hearing this line. Is not only would Theon as a 10-year-old feel terrified that the enemy has kidnapped him and taken him for a hostage and a prisoner, but children, even when their parents are well-meaning, children will often take this as meaning that their parents didn't want them, right? It's so even if Balon resisted as best as he could Theon being taken away from him, Theon could have definitely felt as though Balon just didn't care, especially if Balon was a little standoffish to begin with as a parent. And so that's a further injury to Theon's attachment. Is like, well, my family just threw me away. They just gave me away like a dog. It just didn't matter to them. When I talk with kids in my practice, I'm continually reminded about how children do not understand how the world works because they're kids, they're young. I'll never forget this one time I was talking to this kid. He was, he's 8 or 9 years old. And this was a couple years after his parents had divorced. And I was asking him how he felt about the divorce and all this kind of stuff. And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, "Well, the reason why my parents divorced is because it's my fault. It's all, it's my fault." And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean? Why, how is it your fault?" And he said, "Well, this one day my dad asked me to mow the lawn or do some chore, some big chore. It wasn't a little chore, it was a big chore, like mowing the lawn." He said, "My dad told me to mow the lawn today. And I told him that I would do it later. And I put it off and I didn't do it. And then later that night, my dad came downstairs and told all of us that he was moving out and that our parents were getting a divorce. And it's all because I didn't mow the lawn that day." And doesn't that just break your heart? It just breaks your heart to think that a child would blame themselves for something like that, because kids don't understand how marital relationships work, or at least they shouldn't understand how marital relationships work. And they don't necessarily see all the subtle conflict that's happening. And so in his world, he was looking for a reason as to why something happened. And he's like, well, when I'm a bad boy, bad things happen. And I was a bad boy that day. And my dad, the world punished me because by having my dad move out and having my parents divorced, which was like this really terrible thing. And so Theon could absolutely, at the age of 10, thought, I'm a bad person, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, and that's why my dad sent me away. When in fact, Balon might have had no choice. I'm guessing that's the case, is that Eddard forced Balon to give his child over. So Theon, in the TV show anyway, reveals that he felt really rejected by Theon being sent away. Okay, so Balon says, not only am I not going to join Robb, but I'm actually going to attack, and Theon, you're going to be a minor player in this because I don't respect you. And so Theon is given the captain of the Sea Bitch, and Theon engages in the war against the North, and he raids several villages in the books. They don't depict this in the TV show, because in the TV show they're trying to make Theon likable, and if you read the books, Theon is, as many people are in the books, just way more terrible in the books than they are in the TV show, if you can imagine that. But anyway, so Theon at this point is going full. He's going full Ironborn at this point. But his men don't respect him because he hasn't earned their respect, and he has difficulty controlling them. And to gain the respect of his men, to show he's trying to show his men that he's a tough guy, he is advised to drown a bunch of captives. So people are like, hey, if you want to earn the respect of your men, you should probably take all these captives. And the captives are just these village, peasant people. And he's like, okay, yeah, I'll drown all these people. So he drowns them all, and is completely ruthless in this way. Which I just want to pause and say that this is more trauma for him. Not only has he experienced a lot of really difficult, traumatic situations in his life, but when you are responsible for killing people, or just when you witness people dying, it's a trauma to the brain. Not for everybody, but for many people, and for many situations. Like, for instance, I've accidentally seen videos on LiveLeak. LiveLeak? Is that what's called? The other YouTube. I've accidentally seen videos of people dying, people getting shot, and this sort of thing. I'll click on a link and I'll think like, I'm just curious, and I'll be like, oh, I wonder what I'm going to see. And then I see just this horrible, horrible video. And it's happened a handful of times. Every single one of those times have been burnt into my brain, like the way images used to get burnt into an old CRT screen back in the old computer days. Our brains are designed to take notice of those kinds of things. And so when we kill people, or when we witness death, it also gets burnt into our brain, even though we're not the ones that are threatened. But the notion that human beings can be arbitrarily killed by people is an indirect threat to us, even when we're the ones who are doing the violence. And so we will absolutely be traumatized by this. So for Theon, when he's raiding these villages and raping and killing all these people, it's not doing good things for his brain. And this doesn't make him soft. This is normal for everyone. The one thing that I wish that they would depict better in TV and movies, which I suppose would make it kind of boring, but most movies, most TV shows, when people are killed, no one really reacts to it, especially if they're just sort of like extras that are being killed. But the way real people react to that is very different. Take it from me. When we see even a random person, even someone that we don't like, even if it's the enemy, you're in World War II and you're a British soldier and you kill a Nazi. Well, the Nazis are the enemy, but you can absolutely be traumatized by killing that Nazi as a British soldier, even though they're on the other side. So that's something that they just don't show enough of, because it's a real thing, and it's very common. And a lot of the war stories that people talk about, I think we're sympathetic, or culturally we understand that if you see like your brother in arms being killed right before your eyes, we understand that that's traumatic. But another traumatic thing is when you pull a trigger and blow someone's head off. That's a traumatic thing to happen to you, and that gets burnt into your brain, and it's not a healthy thing to have that burnt into your brain. So this is a major turning point in Theon's development in terms of his character and in terms of his maturity. He's really stuck between a rock and a hard place. Does he choose at this point to be loyal to Robb and turn against his family and run from his family and run to Robb? Does he choose to be disloyal to his father and basically renounce his house. He's heir to House Greyjoy. He's, that's a big deal. And if he goes to Robb, then he's basically throwing all that away, and he'll always be a second-rate citizen to the Starks if he runs to the Starks, or he can be loyal to his family, to the Greyjoys, and try to secure his seat as the heir to the Greyjoy house. But by doing this, he has to completely betray the Starks, the honorable Eddard, the honorable Robb Stark. And if he does this, then he might gain approval from his family, but he might not. So this is an impossible choice to make. He's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. In the TV show, there's this conversation about this between Theon and Master Luwin. When Theon invades Winterfell, there's this conversation. Luwin says, Lord Stark went out of his way to make it your home. So Maester Luwin is like, Eddard went out of his way to make you feel welcome in his home. And Theon says, yes, I know my captors were so very kind to me. You love reminding me of that. Everybody in this frozen pile of shit has loved to remind me of that. You know what it's like to be told how lucky you are that you are someone's prisoner? To be told how much you owe them, and then to go back home to your real father? Blah, blah. So we see that Theon, he's a very conflicted man. All right. Well, we all know that Theon decides to be loyal to his family, and he invades Winterfell. Even though his father said to not invade Winterfell, he disobeyed his father, presumably to impress his father that he could, take the seat of power in the north, and also presumably to get some sort of revenge for being held captive and being made to feel like a second-rate citizen. So he invades Winterfell. Theon captures Winterfell because everyone's fighting in the south. Theon takes Bran and Rickon hostage and declares himself Prince of Winterfell. And he starts acting like a dick because he's always been a dick, and two, he's trying to impress his men so he can gain power in his house. He's learned, oh boy, I can't just say that I'm heir to House Greyjoy and get respect. I have to actually be ruthless in order to get respect. So he starts being a jerk to a lot of different people and killing a lot of people. He meets this guy named Reek in the castle's dungeon and takes him into his service. So, Theon takes over Winterfell and he goes into the dungeon, and there's this guy in there named Reek. And any enemy of your enemy is your ally, right? So he's like, well, anyone who is being imprisoned by the Starks must be a friend of mine. And who's this Reek character? Well, he's probably a good guy. Well, this is actually Ramsay Snow. So we have to back up here a little bit here. So recently, before Theon invaded Winterfell, Sir Roderick Cassel, the Master of Arms at Winterfell, he went to go find Ramsay because Ramsay was his reputation was well known, and there were lots of accounts of Ramsay committing all these really terrible crimes. So this is before Ramsay has any power, and he's just Roose Bolton's bastard son. And Ramsay is running around the north, killing and raping and doing all these terribly sadistic things. And so Sir Roderick Cassel rides off to find Ramsay. Roderick's party comes across Ramsay shortly after Ramsay had raped and killed a peasant girl. So Ramsay just randomly finds this peasant girl. He rapes her and then kills her. And then in the books, Ramsay has this servant boy named Reek. So Reek was an actual person in the books, and Ramsay had this servant boy named Reek, and he reeked. His real name was Heek, but everyone called him Reek because he reeked so bad. And so Ramsay had this servant boy named Reek. And Reek was also a sadistic, terrible person too. And Ramsay and Reek did all these terrible things. Well, after Ramsay raped and killed this girl, Reek was raping the dead body of this girl. So, trigger alert. When Ramsay spots Sir Roderick's men approaching, Ramsay realizes that both of them are not going to be able to escape. So Ramsay, in an attempt to hide his true identity, he pulls Reek off the dead body and gives Reek his clothes. So Ramsay says to Reek, let's switch clothes. And, let's switch all of our clothes. And Reek's like, oh, okay. And Ramsay tells Reek to ride off. And Reek has learned over the years not to question Ramsay because Ramsay is even more of a sadistic, terrible person than Reek is. So Reek puts on Ramsay's clothes and rides off. And as Ramsay expected, Sir Roderick's men chase down Reek. They think Reek is Ramsay and they kill him. The dead girl, so spoiler alert here, the dead girl had soiled herself before she died. So while Reek is being killed by Roderick and those guys, Ramsay dresses up as Reek and smears her poo on himself to make him seem like he's Reek and not Ramsay. And when Roderick's men come back, they think Ramsay is Reek, and they make him a prisoner at Winterfell. Roderick wants to kill Reek, but Roderick needed Reek to be alive as a witness to Ramsay's crimes, because when Roose Bolton hears that Ramsay was killed, they need a witness to say, look, we killed Ramsay. Roose, we killed your son because he was doing all these terrible things, and we have this witness here to tell us that. Well, that's why they kept Reek alive. They didn't realize that Reek was actually Ramsay. So when Theon Greyjoy takes Winterfell, his men find Ramsay in the dungeons, and Ramsay is posing as Reek. And Theon releases Ramsay in exchange for a vow of service to Theon. So he's like, Theon says, I'll release you from the dungeons only if you serve me, Theon. And Reek says, yes, I will serve you. And Reek/Ramsay quickly becomes one of Theon's more trusted attendants. He helps Theon hunt the escaped Bran and Rickon Stark back to Winterfell. He helps Theon cover up the fact that the Stark boys escaped by killing 2 peasant boys who were similar in age to the Stark boys. And then Theon flayed the corpses to avoid recognition. So no one would know that the Stark boys got away, because Theon is terrified that people will learn that he can't hold on to these 2 boys, and then none of his men will respect him. So he, Reek/Ramsay helps him cover that up. Theon then approves Ramsay/Reek killing 3 of Theon's men who knew the truth about the bodies. So 3 of Theon's men had to be killed to cover up the cover-up. Theon then uses the Winterfell Kennel Master as a scapegoat and has him executed for the murders of Theon's men. Theon contemplates killing Reek/Ramsay, but he fears that Reek/Ramsay has written and hidden an account of the truth, so about the Stark boys, so he doesn't kill him yet. So in this instance, we see Theon is going full asshole at this point. I suspect he's desperately trying to be as ruthless as he can to gain the respect of his men. And we can see that it's hard to like Theon at this point. He's nearly as bad as Ramsay, really. I mean, no one is nearly as bad as Ramsay, but Theon's given it his best shot. So Theon is in charge of Winterfell, but soon the Stark men, the Northmen, the good guys, they start marching toward Winterfell to take it back from Theon and his men. And Theon reaches out to his sister, Asha, for help. And she arrives at Winterfell, and she tells Theon that the Ironborn will never succeed in holding a landlocked castle like Winterfell. She's like, we're people of the sea. We don't sit in castles and defend them. We're people of the sea. And if this castle was on the sea, we might be able to defend it with our navy, but we're not. And so I don't know why you even did this, because there's really no point. And so Asha leaves Theon in Winterfell, and Asha says, Theon, you're an idiot for invading Winterfell. I understand you're trying to impress everyone, but it's not impressive because you clearly don't understand our ways. So let's put this to rest and come with me. And Theon becomes enraged. He finally achieved something worthy, and no one is congratulating him. He considers it to be this, humongous achievement. And, it sort of is, to take Winterfell, right? And nobody is appreciating how big of a deal this is. And Asha leaves, and Theon stays because he's prideful and he wants to prove himself somehow. He should have just gone with Asha, but he didn't. And instead he stays in Winterfell, and he's thinking, maybe there's a way I can pull this out. Well, I need reinforcements. So Reek/Ramsay says, I'll go get reinforcements for you. And so Theon sends Reek out to get reinforcements. Ramsay is allowed to leave Winterfell, and Ramsay's like, haha, I'm free once again. Now, something that's not portrayed in the TV show is that not only was Theon much more of a dick, but he also had, as I was saying earlier, like a very Ramsay, dark streak to him. For example, during this time, Theon is really, starting to head downhill. He's just like, crap, I'm in Winterfell. I'm sort of digging myself in here. My family has turned on me. I don't have that many men. My men don't even really respect me. The good guys are coming. I'm dead. And Theon's getting very stressed out. And so he brutally rapes a tavern girl. He gets this tavern girl and he sends for her, and he's like, bring that tavern wench to my bed as a bed warmer. And then one night he's really stressed out and he brutally rapes her just for no reason. I mean, there's really no reason to rape anybody, but and they describe it. And in the end, this girl, she's sobbing and crying, and her neck and her breasts are covered with bruises and bite marks. So imagine that. And instead of feeling bad about it, he shoves her from the bed and tells her to get out. So for those of you that just watched the TV show, you're like, oh, Theon is this, he's a good kid. He's just, a little misguided. Well, George Martin writes this scene in the book, and we see that Theon is, he's just a smaller version of Ramsay. He's a terrible, terrible human being. And so the TV version of Theon is, at least somewhat likable. The book version of Theon, I don't know. So as Theon is freaking out about being killed by the good guys, Master Lewin, who's still alive at this point, he convinces Theon to join the Night's Watch. And Reek returns. Ramsay reveals himself. And by the way, so at this point, Theon is seriously contemplating joining the Night's Watch. He's like, maybe that's my way out. Because that's the thing, if you know the story about the Night's Watch, you know that you can take the black, and all of your previous sins are basically forgiven. But you have to always be at the Night's Watch for the rest of your days. You can never have a wife, and you're stuck in the cold. So it's sort of like the society needs a group of men to man the wall, but no one wants to do it. And so the only people who go there are people who are kind of running away from something. And so Theon is considering that. But he's also like, well, Jon Snow's up there, and Jon Snow's going to kill me because he thinks that I killed his brothers and I, killed all these people at Winterfell and so blah, blah. Anyway, but Reek returns. Ramsay reveals himself. Ramsay tricks the good guys, the Stark bannermen, and slaughters them. As Theon attempts to thank Reek, Reek reveals himself as Ramsay Snow and says, I'm not Reek, I'm Ramsay, and I'm not here to help you. I'm here to win the day and to take over Winterfell. And Ramsay hits Theon in the face and shatters his cheekbone. And Ramsay orders his men to set Winterfell ablaze. So when Theon took Winterfell, he just wanted to take it over. But when Ramsay took it over, he wanted to burn it to the ground. And so Ramsay sets off to, he doesn't burn it to the ground, but, he catches a lot of things on fire and he starts slaughtering all these people, including Maester Luwin, I believe. Theon's father, Balon, falls to his death in Pike. Skipping forward in the story, the Red Wedding happens, Robb dies. Theon thought after he found out about the Red Wedding, he thought, I should have been there with him. Where was I? I should have died with him, meaning that Theon thought he should have died with Robb. I find this to be, a real sweet kind of moment for Theon. He's just like, my poor brother Robb, the good boy Robb, gets slaughtered by the Boltons and the Freys, and I should have been there with him. I should have died with him. That would have been a good way to go, I think, is what Theon thought, especially as he is being tortured by Ramsay. All right, well, let's take a break, and we get back. Let's start to go into the downfall of Theon. Okay, we're back. So this begins the horrible chapter of Theon's life. But before we get into that, we should also mention that in the books, Euron Greyjoy, Theon's uncle, he claims the Sea Stone chair after Balon dies. The Sea Stone chair, that's the throne of the Iron Islands. One of the Ironborn says that Theon is the rightful heir to the throne, and Euron says, fuck that shit, and he drowns the guy for saying this. A king's moot is called to see who will be the king of Pike, and Euron has decided he'll be the king of Pike. This is kind of jumbled up in the TV show. Theon isn't actually there in the books the way that he is in the TV show. Asha comes back to Winterfell to find Theon, but she can't find him, and she can't tell if he's dead because there are many dead bodies. A lot of bodies are burnt and eaten by the wolves after Ramsay, went through there. But so at this point in the books, we actually don't hear a lot from Theon. After Theon gets captured by Ramsay, Theon kind of disappears from the books for a while. But we later learn in the books that Ramsay has been torturing Theon this entire time. And it's ongoing, terrible torture. Ramsay and his bastards boys. This is something they don't have in the TV show. He had this group, because Ramsay was a bastard, right? Ramsay had this group of boys called bastards boys that he, used as his own personal kind of SS troops or something. And Ramsay and the bastard boys, they tortured Theon over and over again. One of the things they did to Theon is they removed the skin on Theon's toes and fingers. They don't show this in the TV show. They removed the skin on his toes and fingers. And from what I understand, this is an incredibly painful situation. And so after a while, days of this, Theon begs Ramsay to cut off his fingers and his toes to stop the pain. And they, wait a few days and they say, oh, okay, let's cut off his fingers and his toes. So he also hates Theon's smile. So remember how Theon has that smirk that everyone notices? Well, Ramsay really, really hates Theon's smile. So he decides he's going to break his teeth out of his mouth. So he pulls or breaks or, maims his face so that a lot of his teeth come out. And it's also implied that Ramsay cuts off his penis. Ramsay makes Theon change his name to Reek. Theon is forbidden to bathe. And Theon is, spread with filth, and he's just super gross. And in the book, they talk about how Theon looks like he's aged 40 years. He looks like a 60-year-old man. He doesn't have much of his teeth left, and the teeth he does have left are all kind of loose and raggedy. Theon has lost a lot of weight, like a third of his weight or something, and he was already lean to begin with, but he looks like really bony now. His hair has turned white, which is interesting. He has white hair in the books. He only has a few of his fingers and a few of his toes, and he hobbles when he walks. They really don't show this in the TV show, because basically in the TV show, he looks exactly the same after tortured as before. But in the books, he's a broken man inside and outside. He just, like, his sister doesn't even recognize him later on. And I think this is a more powerful point that's being made in the books, Anyway, in the TV show, also, we see a lot of scenes in which Theon is being tortured, but in the books, Theon does not appear at all in the third and fourth novels as a narrator, and he's barely mentioned by other people. Theon's torture by Ramsay is revealed in a series of flashbacks throughout the fifth novel. So, as I was saying, as soon as Theon is captured by Ramsay, we don't even hear about him for 2 entire novels. And we wonder, is he dead? It's just, there's all these question marks. So he shows up in the fifth novel as Reek. So in the second novel, we leave Theon as he is just, he's at the top of his game, and then Ramsay thwarts him, and then we don't hear about him for $2. And then in the fifth book, we are introduced to this Reek character, and he's this terrible, emaciated, toothless, fingerless, toeless, weirdo. And then it comes out, oh, that's Theon. It's this crazy reveal in book 5. You're just like, wait, what has happened to Theon? You're just like, how did we get from where we last saw him to now? And then in the fifth book, they do all these flashbacks to all these torture and all these, breaking down of his personality into this Reek character. And you're just like, oh, I see how we got here. Roose Bolton asks Ramsay to take Moat Cailin back from the Ironborn, and Ramsay cleans up. So Ramsay's like, okay, well, how am I going to, take back Moat Cailin? How am I going to do that from the Ironborn? Well, what if I trick them, because I'm Ramsay and I'm super sneaky like that? So Ramsay cleans up Theon and makes him look like a prince again. And Ramsay makes Theon go to the Ironborn and Moat Cailin to convince the Ironborn. This is all depicted in the TV show too. So he sends Theon into Moat Cailin to convince the Ironborn, to convince his people to surrender in exchange for their lives. Ramsay promises food and safe passage to the sick and starving if they surrender. And the Ironborn are like, well, we're going to die either way, so we're going to die if we stay, because we're surviving, but not for long. And so the Ironborn are like, okay, fine. Well, if our prince Theon is here, then sure, okay, we'll surrender. But then Ramsay, like he always does, he reneges on his promise, and he has them all flayed alive. And as a reward, Theon is allowed to sleep with Ramsay's dogs. Theon is there when Ramsay is introduced to Arya Stark. So this is in the book. So this is different. This is a big difference than the TV show. So Theon, this girl comes to or to wherever they're at this point, and these people are like, okay, this is Arya Stark, and Ramsay, you're going to marry Arya Stark, and this is going to end the war in the north because, there's going to be a Stark in control with Ramsay. But Theon is looking at this girl and he's like, that's not Arya. That's actually Jane Poole. I know Jane Poole. Now, in the TV show, this is Sansa, which is a better storyline in my opinion. But anyway, so in the book, Jane Poole is disguised as Arya, sort of, and Jane is sent to marry Ramsay to help end the wars in the north. So, if the Stark allies think that a Stark girl has married Ramsay, then they might end the war in the north. And presumably Theon is kept alive because he's the one person who can say, yes, that's Arya, because everyone else is dead. And Ramsay's like, well, Theon is my little slave, so surely Theon will say whatever I want him to say. And if I want him to say that Jane Poole is Arya, then he'll do that. Ramsay cuts off some of Theon's skin and sends it to Asha. Ramsay says he'll kill Theon if Asha doesn't stop attacking the north. Also, there's evidence that Theon actually believes he is Reek. Not that he is just acting like he's Reek. There's evidence that Theon deep down actually believes he is in fact Reek because of the severe torture he went through. There's a quote from the book. Theon is saying, I'm not Theon. He's saying, I'm not him. I'm not the Turncloak. He died at Winterfell. My name is Reek. It rhymes with freak. My name is Reek. It rhymes with freak. During the wedding between Ramsay and Jane Poole, who is disguised as Arya, Theon gives away the bride because he's the closest person. He's the closest kin to Arya, even though he's not actually kin, but everyone else is dead, or presumed dead, or not around. So they're just like, well, Theon, you have to give away the bride. Several times, Jane begs Theon to rescue her, but Theon is too afraid of Ramsay. The night of the wedding, as Ramsay takes Jane Poole to his bedroom, Ramsay makes Theon strip Jane's clothes off. Then Ramsay makes Theon prepare Jane to be raped by Ramsay. So this is all depicted in the TV show in this very brutal fashion, but instead of Jane Poole, it's Sansa. Theon admits to someone that he's always wanted to be a Stark, and that he didn't want to be a Greyjoy. So this is when a different Theon seems to be emerging somewhat. It's almost like he's being reborn, particularly in the TV show, but in the book kind of too. Theon starts praying at the Heart Tree. He visits the Heart Tree a number of times in the woods in the north. He says to the Heart Tree, he says, "Please, a sword, that's all I ask. Let me die as Theon, not as Reek," unquote. So he's starting to really identify with the gods in the north, and he's starting to turn to religion to help him get through these difficult times. During one visit to the Heart Tree, Theon sees Bran's face, presumably because Bran is, one of the tree face people. And he hears Bran whispering, "Theon." And this helps Theon regain his identity and to move away from the identity of Reek. The Free Folk and Stannis are marching on Winterfell from the north. Remember that whole part of the story? So Stannis joins up with Mance Rayder's people and at the wall, and they start marching south to Winterfell. Theon grabs Jane Poole and tries to escape. In the TV show, this is when Theon kills Miranda, who was about to shoot Sansa in the leg, but that Miranda isn't a character in the books. The Bolton men see, or I don't think Miranda's a character. Anyway, that didn't happen in the books. But in the books, the Bolton men see Theon and Jane trying to escape, and the guards try to kill them. Actually, Mance Rayder is involved in this, but anyway. Theon picks Jane Poole up, and he jumps off the wall. So in the TV show, Sansa and Theon jump off together holding hands, but in the books, Jane doesn't know what to do, and Theon just picks her up and jumps off the wall. And Theon and Jane Poole land in the snow, and they run to Stannis. When they get to Stannis, they realize that Asha is a prisoner of Stannis because Stannis has run into Asha as she has been attacking the north, and Stannis is like, well, we're not going to have that. And so Stannis imprisons Asha. And so Theon and Asha are reunited. And as I said earlier, Asha doesn't even recognize Theon because he looks so old and weird from all the torture he's been through. So that's where the books end, actually, which might kind of shock you because if you've been watching the TV show, there's a lot more to the story. But yeah, that's where the books end. Theon is looking like shit. He's looking like a 60-year-old emaciated man with no teeth and no fingers, or with only a few fingers, only a few toes. And he's a prisoner of Stannis, and he's no longer under Ramsay's thumb, which is definitely a good thing. And he actually managed to rescue Jane Poole, which is pretty cool. Now, there's a sample chapter from The Winds of Winter from Book 6. George Martin released a sample chapter, which might change when the actual book comes out. So this could be just like a rough draft, but we did learn a little bit more about Theon's story. Not much, but a little bit. So again, Theon is a prisoner of Stannis, and Stannis questions Theon about Ramsay's army, and Theon answers all of his questions honestly, because Theon's like, I don't care about Ramsay. I hate that guy. And Stannis plans on executing Theon because Stannis wants to placate the men in the north who want Theon dead because Theon presumably killed Bran and Rickon. But remember, he didn't kill Bran and Rickon. But the men in the north think that. And so the men in the north are like, Stannis, if you want us to be on your side, you have to kill Theon. Theon actually hopes that Stannis will kill him to end his suffering and to end his guilt for betraying the Starks and to end his suffering as a broken man. But Asha pleads with Stannis to spare Theon's life. But Stannis is not really that sort of guy. He's not the sort of guy to give mercy. So when that fails, Asha asks Stannis to not burn him alive and instead just chop his head off, which is a quicker death. So that's all we know about Theon from the sample chapter. It's not much more, but it's a little bit more. So in the books, it looks like Theon could be executed by Stannis, but I'm guessing that Martin will spare Theon's life because Martin loves to keep miserable people alive so we can put them through more misery. Also, the TV show presumably follows the rough outline of the story. George Martin has told the producers of the TV show, here's a rough outline of where all the characters are going to go. And we learn in the TV show that Theon does survive all this. And so it seems likely that Theon will survive. So we'll see. All right, well, let's talk about the TV show. So all of this could be completely, not what happens in the books. I'm really curious to see what book 6 is going to be like because this is the first time that the TV show has come out before, the TV has season, wait, am I saying this right? Yeah, season 6 of the TV show came out ahead of the books, right? And up until season 6 of the TV show, all the stuff on the TV show had been already said in the books. And George Martin has been telling him, look, here's the rough outline. But I think the producers are like, well, we might go your way or we might go our own way. And I think George Martin's like, fine, it's your TV show, do what you want. He's not that cavalier about it, but George Martin isn't being a stickler. He's like, look, it's a TV show. I write the books, you make the TV show. They're related to each other. But anyway, in the TV show, Theon does a lot more stuff. Right after he and Sansa get out of Winterfell, they're running away in the snow. And there's this heartbreaking scene. There's this wonderful scene in which Theon and Sansa are hiding under that fallen tree, and it looks like they're about to be hunted down by Ramsay's men and the dogs. And Sansa Stark says in the TV show, she says, when you take the black, all your crimes are forgiven. So Sansa's trying to say, hey, join the Night's Watch. And Theon says, I don't want to be forgiven. I can never make amends to your family for the things I've done. So he's like, I don't want to be forgiven for the things I've done. The things I've done to your family, Sansa, can never be forgiven. I should never be forgiven for that. Now, again, this is different from the books because Theon is exhibiting actual remorse at this point, whereas in the books, it's definitely not so much that way. But anyway, this is the moment that when Theon won my heart, when he became someone that I cared about in this show in terms, he's always been an interesting character, but I always, every time he was on screen, I was just like, there's Theon again. And even when he was being tortured, I'm just like, well, you deserve it. You look at all this stuff you did. You're a terrible human being. I don't care about you. But at this point, when he saves Sansa and he's running away and he's protecting her and he's getting her away from the wolves and she's like, okay, we'll go north to Jon Snow and you can come with me and you'll take the black and all will be forgiven. And Theon's like, I don't want to be forgiven because I've done terrible things. He's finally reached a point that, he truly empathizes with the people that he's hurt. After all he's been through, after all the torture he's been through, he still doesn't think he's been through enough. When I heard him say that, I wanted everyone to forgive him. At this point, some of Ramsay's men arrive, and Theon tries to sacrifice himself to save Sansa, but it doesn't work. But then Brienne and Pod arrive, and they save the day. So I just want to comment a little bit on the psychology of what's going on here. We have Theon who has been abused and really his whole life, particularly in his early life. When he was at the Stark, when he's at Winterfell under Eddard, that was the good years. But as a child, he was abused, and then under Ramsay, he was massively abused. When you're abused, you start to believe that you deserve the abuse, and I've seen this a lot. People who are repeatedly abused, they have to make a choice. There's two different options they can choose from. One, they can choose to believe that they are being treated unfairly, which is logical, but this results in them getting angry and trying to break free, which often results in more abuse. So they have another choice, though, too. They can choose to see the abuse as justified. This viewpoint makes them just give up, so they don't fight back, and they accept their fate. But after they are free from the abuse, so I hope this makes sense. If you're being repeatedly abused, particularly by your parents or by your older brothers, you can look up and you can say, like, this is unfair. This is not my fault. And when you're coming from that mindset, you fight back. You try to break free. You talk back. You try to get allies to help you. Well, if that doesn't work, as in the case of his older brothers and with Ramsay, then it doesn't do any good to fight back. It doesn't do any good to think that it's unjust. It's just a weight on your on your mind that, wait, this is unfair. Or you can adopt a different point of view where you're just like, yes, all this is fair because I'm a terrible person. And when you adopt that point of view, it's not a great point of view, but it can work better for your life because then you just accept the fact that you're going to get beat, because you're going to get beat either way. And when you are beat, you act subservient, which actually calms people down. When, Ramsay presumably would beat Theon less when Theon was more subservient, right? And Theon's older brothers might have been the same way, unknown. But the point is that when you truly adopt a perspective on the inside that you deserve to be hurt, and therefore you don't get angry and you don't fight back, then it actually makes your life easier. So you're rewarded for believing that you deserve to be punished. Well, after people that make this choice to say that they deserve to be punished, once they're free from the abuse as an adult, they will often seek abuse from other people, or they seek out abusive people because deep down they believe that they deserve to be punished for their sins. This is what we call masochism, right? And this is why many people who grow up in abusive families will seek out abusive partners later in life. And it's just heartbreaking. It's just this double, terrible, unfair thing that happens to people. Okay, so again, we're in the TV show here. Sansa and Brienne decide to go to Jon at Castle Black. And since Theon has betrayed the Starks, Theon believes that Jon will kill him, which is, very possible. So he decides to go a different way, and he goes home to Pike. They have a King's Moot, which in the books he wasn't there, but on the TV show Theon is there. Theon nominates Yara, or Asha, to be queen of the Ironborn, which I don't believe happened in the books. But Euron wins the favor of the people. So Theon and Yara flee because they think Euron will kill them, which he probably will. So they go across the narrow sea to Volantis. Yara and all the other Ironborn are having fun in a brothel, and we see Theon just sitting there. You can't have any fun, and he's plagued with guilt and shame. And Yara commands him to drink, and commands him to be a man. So he drinks his entire cup of booze, but he doesn't seem to be enjoying it. Theon, and so at this point, this is all season 6 stuff. They really, my guess is that they know what George Martin's outline is, and when it comes to Theon and Yara, and Yara / Asha, they seemingly just really accelerated Theon's story to kind of get him to a certain point, so that season 7 can start at a certain point. So Theon and Yara are suddenly with Daenerys in Meereen. So normally, in one of George Martin's book, they would have Theon traveling across, this, and there would be other adventures and stuff. But suddenly they go from Volantis to Meereen, and Theon and Yara are meeting with Daenerys, and Tyrion is there, right? And Theon and Yara become allies with Daenerys and Tyrion. And Theon and Yara say that they can get a bunch of ships. So, and then at the very end of season 6, we see Theon, and I believe Asha is there, not sure, but we at least see Theon is traveling back to Westeros with Daenerys and Tyrion and Varys and the Iron Fleet, the Dothraki, the Unsullied, Olenna Tyrell and her army, Ilaria Sand and the Dorne army, and of course the dragons. And so Theon is a part of the Daenerys crew, which is bringing together a lot of different sorts of people, which is just amazing to see Daenerys finally sailing on, a lot of Ironborn ships, but other kinds of ships too, to Westeros. And so this was another kind of, super skipping forward in the story, because the whole Varys story was, it's like Varys is suddenly back with them. They've met up with the Tyrells and the Dorne people. And so it's pretty amazing. So season 7, which starts in a couple of months, I can't wait for. So that's what I'll say about Theon Greyjoy. What will I say overall, though, here? What's the final word on Theon? Let's see. Let's make some maybe predictions about what will happen to Theon. I think as we go into season 7 and 8 of the TV show, I think, and this obviously could be very different from the books, but I think what we're going to see is Theon is not going to play a major role. I don't think that the way, because season 7 and 8 are just going to have like 7 episodes each or something like that, and they have a lot of things that they need to work out before they get to the topic of Theon. They have Daenerys and the dragons and Tyrion and Cersei and Jon Snow, and then you have the army of the dead and all that kind of stuff. And you have, I don't know, you just have a lot of different major characters and major storylines that need to be fleshed out. And I have a feeling like the episodes are, because the last episodes of season 6 of the TV show, they were more like little movies, and I suspect that season 6 or season 7 and 8 are going to be similar to that. And Theon is just going to probably show up barely, because moving forward into the story, there's not really a big need for him in the storyline. Does he need to face off with anybody? Does he need, Ramsay's already dead, so he can't really get revenge in that way. Sansa took care of that. So I suspect in the TV shows, Theon isn't, because really, where do you go with that character at that point? He's with Daenerys. He doesn't think he is fit to rule. I suppose maybe in the end, Theon will go home and Balon will accept him. Maybe that'll be in the prologue episodes or something. Theon will return home with Asha. Or no, sorry, the father's dead. Yeah, that's probably what'll happen. I'll probably, again, this is all just me predicting things, and I'm usually wrong about this sort of stuff. But so Euron will join with Cersei, probably, and then Euron will be defeated, as will Cersei, hopefully, and then Theon and Asha will return to the Iron Islands and rule, maybe as brother and sister or something. And so that is my guess. Daenerys will, place them in power over there or something. Who knows? Or it could also end in a horrific, terrible way, and maybe Euron is king of Westeros or something. You just never know what's going to happen. In the books, however, I imagine George Martin is going to flesh out Theon's story. I don't, given the way that George Martin is writing, I don't think he's going to be able to wrap up the entire story within the next couple books. So, I could, the way he's writing, I could absolutely see him having like a whole other, adventures and storylines for Asha and for Theon. But, who knows? I guess we'll just have to find out. What can I say about Theon's psychology in summary? I think Theon's character is an excellent case study in one who is forced to develop defense mechanisms of arrogance, defense mechanisms of false narcissism, defense mechanisms of always trying to prove yourself, and being in a social situation he's never in a social situation in which he's acceptable. As a young child, he was the smaller, weaker brother. As a teenager, he was a prisoner and a second-rate citizen and would never be good enough. He was the son of this asshole Balon in the Iron Islands. And then under Ramsay, he was, made to feel terrible. And then now he's with Stannis, and he's, being punished for his crimes. Maybe his head's going to be lopped off. He's just been bouncing around from one thing to another. But the thing we can say is that he could have made different choices. There was a time when, a lot of his choices made sense looking back until he gets home to Pike and he tells his father, look, let's join Robb. And his father's like, nope, I'm not joining Robb. In fact, I'm going to attack Robb. At that point, Theon, quote unquote, has a choice, right? He could have ran back to Robb and said, my father's gone off the rails. I don't know what to do. I'm on your side. Da, da, da. He could have done that. Now, he would have died alongside Robb at the Red Wedding, but he wanted that in the end. He's like, it would have saved me from all this torture and humiliation from Ramsay. So but at the same time, you can totally understand why Theon made that choice. He is the heir to to House Greyjoy, and he is a Greyjoy, and he was never made to feel really at home at Winterfell. And so why would he run back to his captors, to his jailers? Why would he do that? So it was a really, really tough choice for Theon. Very, very difficult choice. And then once he chooses that he's going to try to be an Ironborn, then he's choosing a life of brutality and of taking things from people and of disregarding human life, which he, jumped headfirst in because he wanted to impress his family, which led him to attacking Winterfell, which led him to acting like he had killed the Stark boys, and which led him to Ramsay, and which led him to Stan. I mean, you just get the sense like, my God, this guy was just dealt like a really shitty hand. And I when I talk about him this way, I just feel so bad for the guy. And of course, it makes sense that he is arrogant. I think the book version is much more realistic in that when you're treated this way, you have personality traits that are kind of persistent over time. And because at this point in the TV show, Theon is a born again nice guy, right? In the TV show, he's talking about, I would have died to get Sansa to safety. He's like, he's like one of the most chivalrous people in Game of Thrones at this point, at the end of the TV show. But in real life, people don't change that much. If you're an arrogant prick, you'll change a little bit, but you're not going to change drastically in that way. And so the book portrays it much more accurately, which I think is interesting. It's just it's just another example of the fact that I can do 5, I don't know how long this episode is, a couple hours. The fact that I can, do 5 several hours episodes on different characters and their psychology and their development and their choices and how consistent the personalities are and how their personalities make sense given their traumas and their histories is a testament to the genius of George Martin. There's so many things that he does right. Not only does he understand humans, not only does he understand trauma and personality development, but he also writes interestingly. He has a fully fleshed out world that you get a very good sense for. And he's not a cheesy writer. He doesn't pull any punches. Everyone can die at any moment. And it's just, it's why the books are so popular and why the TV show is so popular. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Again, if you haven't become a patron of the podcast, do so. Go to patreon.com. The more people become patrons, the more time I have to dedicate to this podcast, which means I'll have more time to do episodes like this. There's so many characters in Game of Thrones I'd like to do. But the preparation for these Game of Thrones episodes takes hours, and it took me weeks to prepare for this episode. It just takes so long. I have to get the books out, look up stuff, and it's a lot of work, but I love it. And the more people who are patrons, the more I'm able to dedicate time to this because I have to take away from my regular job. And the more episodes we can do on Game of Thrones and other characters, Batman, Superman, whoever. I know people are asking they want me to do an episode on Euron Greyjoy and do an episode on Littlefinger and Varys and Jorah. And no one's asked me to do an episode on Daenerys, which I find to be interesting. No one wants, because I think her character isn't that compelling. She's just kind of, I don't know. But everyone wants Euron, Littlefinger, and Varys. Who else have people been asking about? Maybe that's it. But anyway, Jon Snow, probably people want to hear about him. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining me out there. Please take care of yourself because you deserve it. Even if you're Theon, you deserve it.